Friends and colleagues located across the world. My name is Richard Haddock, Program Manager of the East Asia National Resource Center, and I'm very happy to be a part of organizing this great event, this book talk with author Elizabeth Miki Brina today. Before we get into the discussion, I do want to go over just a few tech-related items for our discourse throughout today's event. We're in a Zoom webinar, and this is recorded and will be uploaded to the NRC's YouTube channel after the event. So if you want to see the event again, or if you didn't have the chance to see it all, please do stay tuned when we upload it to our YouTube channel. We'll send a message to all those who RSVP'd, so you'll be sure to get the link. Second, we encourage all our attendees to ask questions throughout the event. We will have a live Q&A portion at the end of the event. So to submit a question, please use the Q&A function of Zoom. If you don't see it on your screen, if you go to the lower part of the screen where all the icons are and you click the Q&A button, should be next to chat. That opens up a separate window. Feel free to submit your questions there. We ask you to submit there and not to submit questions via chat so that we can keep track of all the questions being asked and that we can get to as many questions as possible. If you don't mind including your name and affiliation in your question, that way we know who we're addressing, that would also be greatly appreciated. So now I would like to introduce our moderator for this evening's event, Professor Kuniko Ashizawa, who teaches international relations and serves as Japan Coordinator of Asian Studies Research Council at the School of International Service at American University. From 2005 until 2012, she was a senior lecturer in international relations at Oxford Brookes University in the UK. Her research interests include Japan's foreign, security, and development assistance policy, US-Japan-China relations, regional institutional building in Asia, and the role of the concept of state identity in foreign policy making. Professor Ashizawa also teaches courses at GW, including Women in Asia, and thank you to all of her students for joining us this evening, and I'm sure she will lead a very robust and invigorating discussion. So Professor Ashizawa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Richard, and then thank you for kind of organizing this quite exciting event today. So my name is Kuniko Ashizawa. As Richard kindly introduced me, I have been teaching various places, but including the GW over the past 2 years, and I teach a few courses on Asia. And then particularly, I'm excited to have Miss Brina today because I just introduced new courses entitled Women in Asia at the GW. So there has been a demand on the courses dealing with women and gender issues in general at the various universities in Washington, D.C., including GW and then also AU. But this probably reflects the students' demand. And so I'm really happy to cater this new demand for my students and also GW communities, and then also to be moderate for this event today. I indeed, so as a typical academics, I work at home, particularly during the COVID time over the past 2 semesters at home. And then when I worked at home, I was listening NPR and then doing some grading or other things. And then so earlier this year, I was listening NPR and doing like a grading of students' paper. And then I came across the name. I heard the name Elizabeth Miki Brina. And then the voice was talking about something about Okinawa, and then women, and then herself. And that really caught my attention. What is this? And it looks so it sounded so interesting. And then after that, I came across several, the really good reviews and then placed on her Elizabeth's book by NPR, Associated Press, or New Yorker. And then, so I've been thinking about her name and then her book since the beginning of this year. And then finally, we are able to organize this book event. And then, so I'm so excited about this. In addition to my Women in Asia course, actually from which course my students are participating, joining this event, we also have at GW other kind of interesting interest in Miss Brina's book. The GW has a strong research focus on Okinawan issues, on Okinawa in Japan issues over the past decades. And then our library even holding a special collection called Okinawa Collection. And then some of you who are familiar with Okinawan history and Okinawa-Japan and US relationship, the next year will mark the 50th anniversary of the Okinawan reversion to Japan, from the United States to Japan. And then we as a GW are going to organize a set of events to commemorate this anniversary. So we see that today's event as a kind of kickoff event for over the series of the commemoration events next year. So as such, I'm again really grateful for Ms. Brina coming to this event, also her very important contribution of shedding light on Okinawa issues, particularly among American audience. Okay, I'm gonna really kind of shorten my introduction, and I would like to introduce today's the main person for this event. So I think everyone can see her name, Elizabeth Miki Brina, Miss Brina. She is the author of the book titled "Speak in Okinawa." As I said, it was published in February 2021 this year. And then she has been the recipient of Rona Jaffe Leaf Scholarship, and then also New York State Summer Writers Institute Scholarship. So she has been kind of growing as a wonderful writer over the years. And then, as I've mentioned, her book received some interesting, very positive plays, and then also reviews over the past several months. And then also, I just learned from Ms. Brina that her book is also going to translate in Japanese by Misuzu Shobo, Misuzu the Press, which is very kind of well-known, established the publishers in Japan. So this is kind of wonderful to kind of add additional information to share with you. Some of you already might have read her book or some part of her book. So I would not necessarily introduce her book, because she's going to introduce by herself on her book. And then, so the way we are going to organize this the event. First, I'm going to ask Elizabeth to do a little bit quick introduction on her book, and then also do a short book reading of a portion of her book she chose. And then after that, we are going to open up very interesting conversation between Elizabeth and then Professor Steve Rabson. I'm going to introduce Steve Rabson after Elizabeth's introduction. And then they will have conversation and Q&A on the book, and then also Okinawan issues. And after that, I will open up the Q&A session for all the participants, the audience can also raise the question. I will pick up the question you want to write in your Q&A, in the Q&A the box to raise either for Elizabeth or also Steve himself. Okay, so without further ado, I would really like to pass on the stage to Miss Brina, Elizabeth Brina, and then to first of all hear her the introduction on the book, and then also her book reading. Okay, thank you. And over to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was a wonderful introduction, and I thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you to the East Asia National Resource Center for putting this on, for George Washington University. I'm very, very, very excited about this. Very happy to be here. Thank you to everyone who came to listen to us and participate in this conversation about my book, Speak Okinawa. It's my first book. It's a memoir. It's called Speak Okinawa because that's where my mother was born and raised, and she lived there until she met my father, who was a U.S. soldier stationed on the island. And I'm a little bit intimidated because it seems like people are very familiar. Some of the people in the audience are very familiar with Okinawan history, but I didn't know anything about Okinawan history until I started writing this book about 6 years ago when I was 34 years old, and not knowing about my history, my mother's history, caused a very huge rift between me and my mother, and a strain, and we were very estranged from each other growing up because of the cultural barrier and the language barrier. Her native language is Japanese, and she was learning English while I was growing up. So, and this, definitely not knowing my history or my heritage also hindered my understanding of myself and how I felt about myself, and that's really what this book is about, is the discovery and trying to reconcile with my mother, and then also my history and my heritage through that process. Probably what most people know about Okinawa is that the Battle of Okinawa. That's all I had ever heard of it before I started writing. But I had only heard of the battle from the U.S. perspective, right? How it was a very horrific battle for the U.S. military and the lives that they lost. But I had no idea that the island was completely devastated, just crushed from all the bombings and charred black from the fires, and that 140,000 Okinawans were killed. It was roughly 1/3 of the population, and I had not known that before, and I think that is something. Not knowing that is a tragedy for so much of my life, and that because it's important to know, and it helps me understand my mother's place in the world and my place in the world, and it was shortly after this battle that the militarization of the island began, and I'm going to read an excerpt from the first chapter that kind of takes place after that. In 1972, Okinawa reverted, or rather was sold back to Japan for the sum of $685 million. The Okinawans who were skeptical held their breath. The Okinawans who were hopeful celebrated. They sang and danced. They marched in parades and waved Japanese flags. They thought they were done with the US military, done with the bases. The bases remain. Since 1972, nearly 9,000 crimes, including murders by shooting, by stabbing, by strangulation, vehicular homicide, theft, arson, rape, sexual assault, have been committed by US military personnel stationed in Okinawa. 169 court-martial cases for sexual assault, a higher record than at US military bases in any other nation, have occurred in Okinawa. Today, 20% of Okinawan landmass is still controlled by the US military, more land controlled by a foreign military than in any other nation. Okinawa became known as R&R Island, a place where troops could relax and recuperate between stints at war. My father was stationed on Okinawa after he fought for 4 years in Vietnam. He met my mother in Kadena, just outside the army base, at a club called the Blue Diamond, where she worked as a waitress, getting paid $1 for every drink she got a serviceman to buy for her. And here's where history becomes mine, alive in me. He sits on a stool. He is strong, confident. He is handsome, movie star handsome, Elvis handsome. He smiles with straight white teeth and flashes a wad of crisp cash. He orders a bourbon on the rocks in a language and accent that signal power. She sits next to him. She is petite, slender. She is beautiful, exotic. She smiles and twirls a few strands of her dark, dark hair, as smooth as silk, flowing down to her waist like water. Is love possible in a place like this, in a situation like this, between two people from separate worlds on opposite sides of war and conquest? I will never know how the story began, only how it ends. Perhaps just someone who had grown up eating sweet potatoes for every meal, sleeping in the same room as her mother, father, and 6 siblings, he must have seemed like a way out. Perhaps just someone who had just spent 4 years in combat. She was too vulnerable to resist. He had to save her. And so a year later, in 1974, 2 years after the reversion and 1 year before the Vietnam War ended, they married on the island. Marriage to locals was discouraged, but as a commanding officer, my father granted his own approval. It was a small ceremony, only Oba attended. My grandfather was too sick, my uncles were too angry, my aunts were too sad, scared, maybe jealous that their sister was marrying an American, a soldier, that their sister was leaving. Oba managed to scrounge enough money to rent 2 traditional wedding kimonos and hire a photographer to document the event. My mother has seen her mother 3 times in the 45 years since she left. And I don't know if you can see, but it's on the it's on the front page. This is the photo that my grandma had paid to take, and these are my parents. But you can't see how good looking they are through the Zoom. So maybe you have to get the book to see. They're both very beautiful. So I'm glad they put the picture there. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. It's wonderful that to kind of see listen that authors actually reading him on his own book, and then as a political scientist or international relations scholars, we tend to look at the Okinawa as with the numbers and then kind of chronological, historical kind of narratives rather than personal, the language and the narration. So it was already kind of helpful for me to get a little bit deeper understanding of what the situation in Okinawa. Now I would like to open up to move on to a second stage, which would be our conversation between the Miss Brina and the Professor Robson. So Professor Robson, I think you are on. So the Professor Robson kindly indeed introduce Ms. Brina to us and then to help us to organize this event. As some of you have already read his kind of the short bio on the maybe program, but Professor Robson, Steve Robson, is the leading, I think one of the leading scholar, and then also the friends of Okinawa in the United States. Professor Emeritus of East Asian Studies at Brown University. He has been teaching Okinawa and also East Asian issues for years. And then Professor Robson published a series of books and also articles on Okinawa, but also helped to translate Okinawan's authors into English. Also, he had a chance to be stationed in Okinawa, particularly in Henoko region, which is indicating really kind of the area of the tension in the current US-Japan relationship. But he was there in 1960s as a member of US Army members. Okay, so I would like to just open up the conversation between Ms. Brina and then Professor Robson about her book, and then also about Okinawa, and then of course women in Okinawa and then in Asia, or maybe in the United States in general. Okay, so over to you again, Ms. Brina and then Professor Robson.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Professor Aizawa. Yes, I was so happy to hear that the book is being translated into Japanese. It will be extremely interesting to hear the reactions in Japan. But I'm wondering, Elizabeth, if you can tell us some of the reactions you've heard to it from readers so far. It's been out now for 8 months, so you must have heard some reactions.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's been overwhelmingly positive, which is wonderful. I've received messages from many children, primarily daughters of mothers who are from Okinawa, and their fathers were stationed in Okinawa. And I think that just reinforces that we are a community. There's a community of us out there that are really seeking recognition and connection with each other. I've also had heard from many children of biracial and bicultural heritage who are tell me that my story really resonated with them, and that we had very similar experiences, and that my story helps them feel seen, which also helps me feel seen, right? Because that I wasn't alone in this situation. And I've received messages from both men and women who served in the military in Okinawa, as well as wives of servicemen, and they, usually it's to thank me and to saying how fondly that they remember the time that they spent there, and they felt very welcome in Okinawa despite their reason for being there, and they were sorry for what the Okinawans had to endure. And I just remember one in particular. It was a handwritten letter from a woman who had lived there with her husband in the late 50s, and so it was, and she remembers a woman who, an Okinawan maid who helped her care for her baby, and that she wouldn't have been able to get through that time without her, and that was really incredibly heartwarming. And of course, there's been a few reactions of people who are very angered and disappointed by by the book and the version of history, the point of view that I'm telling, and that saying that I didn't offer enough a broad enough perspective, and I understand that, because like I had said before, I'm coming to this new, and I know it's a complicated situation that I'm just starting to scratch the surface of. So.
Thanks. Yeah, that's very informative. Can you talk more about the experiences of your mother and your grandmother in Okinawa during the battle in 1945 and the U.S. military occupation from 1945 to 1972? I realize you don't have any memories yourself of that, but you have some material in the book that goes very deeply into this.
Well, my mother wasn't born until 1948. But she has one of her older brothers and her three older sisters were small children. And my grandmother basically kept them alive by herself because my grandfather had been conscripted fairly early on in the war, and so he was in Korea and fighting and being held prisoner for a while, all throughout the Battle of Okinawa. So she survived, and she took care of her children, which is this incredible act of heroism that I wish she could have told me directly, and then I could have heard more about it secondhand. I don't think my family really liked to talk much about it, and because my mother, I didn't hear much from my mother. She told me that they all I heard from my mother was that they had to hide in caves, and then they were starving all the time. They're always scavenging for food, and that was, I even when I had visited Okinawa and was trying to ask my family questions, you could tell that they were very, very reserved about it. So I had to fill in a lot of the gaps with through the research and through memoirs of survivors, and from from kind of gathering this information and the speculation of knowing that where my family was, they were in Kadena, which is where the troops landed. That I know that they were basically running for their lives, fleeing to the south. They just like during the day hiding wherever they could hide, and at night fleeing. And I heard some accounts from survivors of stumbling over bodies in the dark, and losing each other because of all the masses and the chaos. So I'm sure it was very horrific, and I'm so glad that she was able to make it when so many other people didn't.
Well, let's talk a little bit about another war that had a profound effect on your family. Your father served 4 terms of duty in Vietnam. He was there for 4 years. How did his deployment to Vietnam affect him and your family?
Well, my father grew up in he's in 1950s, and 1950s and 60s, and he he's a man from the United States, so he very much absorbed this savior complex, he was really into King Arthur, and had this idea of a noble warrior, and that America was the leader of the free world, and it was their duty as Americans to protect the free world and make sure that democracy spread throughout the world. And so this was a major reason why he volunteered to fight, as opposed to being drafted, because he thought that he could save people. He thought he could make the world a better place. and whether or not whether or not he actually fought for a noble cause, I know that he believed that he did, and that he really cared about the people he believed he was fighting for, and he really cared about the people that he actually fought with. And so when the U.S. Withdrew, he was very heartbroken about his friends that he knew in the Vietnamese army. And he's very haunted by this regret and defeat for the rest of his life. And all the lives that he couldn't save and tried to save. So when I was growing up, he projected that very much onto me and my mother. He was a very, very, very protective father. He had to know where we were at all times. Where my mother was. He drove her to work. And where I was, if I came home late from school, he called all the teachers. He called the school. He called all my friends' parents. A few times he called the police. So he had and it was PTSD. It was always the worst case scenario in his mind, that if he didn't know where we were, that something terrible was happening to us. And so it's very it was difficult. It was a challenge to be around that, and I wasn't fully aware of the connection between his experience in Vietnam, and then also his and how overprotective he was. Yeah.
It took a long time for the government to recognize the PTSD as a medical condition. But your father refused the veterans benefits that were being offered to people who suffered from that. Can you explain why he did that?
He thought, I can only explain what he told me. He said that he couldn't, because of the people who died, he didn't feel like he had a right to the money, right? Like he survived, he was able to live, like that was enough. So I think he felt like the guilt. I think he felt like he didn't deserve it. And yes, the fact that it wasn't acknowledged as a condition for so long, like it took, that he didn't acknowledge it as a condition either. He kind of, that's what you're supposed to do, right? You're just supposed to bear it. And so that's what he believed, that he was lucky enough to be alive, and that whatever pain he was in, he should just bear it.
Well, let's change the focus a little bit to your own experience. How would you say your Asian ancestry has affected your relationships in the United States, particularly with American men? You write about that in some detail.
I grew up in a predominantly white suburb of Rochester, New York. It's called Fairport, New York. And it was in the 1980s and 90s. Not as, it's getting better. I like to believe that it's getting better, but I just looked around me, and everyone was white, and everyone at school, everyone I read about was white. On TV, everyone I saw was white. And it got to a point where I thought that I was a white person, but I didn't understand why people were treating me differently. I didn't understand. I was surprised sometimes by just how I looked, because what I believed, how I believed, and what I believed of myself inside did not match what other people saw. And so I was, developed this inferiority complex because I saw, that white people were, and, in my town, they were the most popular, they were the most successful. I was constantly envious of my friends because of how they looked, and then also how they acted because of how they looked, their confidence, and they're just the way that they navigated the world. They always seemed so sure of themselves, and I was always very timid and very insecure. And I think, and because of that, because of just growing up with that feeling, and being a woman too, how we validate ourselves, and it's usually from the attention of men. And so that was one of the ways that I could feel accepted, was through attention from men, and any bit of attention that they could give me, I was so grateful for, and I vied for it, and I probably made some self-compromising decisions, and it took and again, this is something that I didn't realize while I was growing up. I didn't realize the connection. I didn't realize that this was because of race, because of because of racism, internalized and existing in the world. I just thought it was something that was wrong with me, and especially because there was very few other people who had this similar experience. I was very isolated, and the ones who, any person, most of the people of color in my town were, they were usually poor, and I just noticed that they were poor, and people made fun of them behind their backs, right? All I was like, don't be that, like, get as far away from that as possible. And so I very much rejected my Asianness as much as I could, and also, and as an extension of that, rejected my mother, because that's where I got it from, so it really, it put a strain on a relationship for a very long time, until I understood what was happening.
Yes, that is a very noticeable change in the relationship between you and your mother from the beginning to the end of the book. In fact, one reviewer called that book a love letter to a mother, but obviously they were talking about the end of the book and not in the beginning and some of what followed. Could you tell us more about how and why your relationship with your mother changed over time?
Well, I think first, my mother was, because of the language barrier and the cultural barrier, and she was very, very lonely and very, very sad. She's very isolated, very lonely, very sad, and that's how I saw her most of the time. And she coped very often with alcohol. So she drank a lot, and she would cry, and she would call her family in Okinawa and just be crying, and that's what I saw. I saw this woman who in my mind was weak and couldn't take care of me, and couldn't show me the way through this world, right? The world that I lived in Fairport, New York. But before I understood the history, before I understood Okinawan history, I just blamed her for it. I thought that this is, I blamed, I was like, this is just a you problem, right? And wondered why she couldn't get herself together, why she couldn't learn English better. Yeah, I mean, I was incredibly cruel and harsh to her in my perception of her growing up. And it was very difficult to process that. But now that I know the history, of course, how couldn't she? The history of Okinawa, how she was born right after the battle, grew up in extreme poverty, grew up witnessing the militarization, the subordination, and 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 it was only 3 years after the battle, so she absorbed all of that grief, and that trauma. So and then that shaped who she became, and then she was brought to the United States, and it was almost another form of trauma, to to go to this place that's supposed to be the where all your dreams are going to come true, and that disappointment, and also the rejection from where she was, and her own daughter. So it's I don't know, I guess I just had the evolution it took many years for us to reconcile, and it had everything to do with just knowing her, just getting to know her, getting to know her heritage, her history, and realizing that it wasn't her fault, that it was actually the opposite of her fault, and also understanding that there are so many. Really trying to learn Japanese helped a lot too. I don't know Japanese at all, because it's so hard to learn another language. So, and the fact that she was able to do it at all, she speaks English with highly functional level. But I know that growing up, I always felt that there were some places some topics that we couldn't talk about, and some places inside each other we couldn't reach because of the language. But now I realize that there's so many different ways to express yourself and show love, and I try to I tried to communicate with her. We have kind of like a code or a small talk, right? That has is layered with more meaning, and it's always trying to convey, I think, I forgive you, I love you, even when we're not saying those words explicitly. But yeah, after writing this book, huge weight was lifted, and I don't feel a strain anymore with my mother. I feel very comfortable and at ease in her presence. So it took a long time though.
So I'm going to ask you one more question. It's sort of a general question, then we'll open it up for questions from listeners. There's occasionally stories in the media about failed marriages between American veterans and women that they met in Okinawa. Some of them are, of course, sensationalized, but they report actual incidents of abuse and abandonment. And there was even one murder in Ohio a few years ago. Of course, this seems to lead to a distorted view about these marriages, which statistics show are no more likely to fail than marriages in the population at large. Could you speak a little bit about how your parents managed to maintain their marriage over all those years?
I'm still trying to figure it out, but because I'm very proud of them. And for a long time, I didn't understand their marriage. I thought that you know, I focused so much on how they were different, and I focused so much on their dysfunction that I didn't understand why they were together in the first place. I think that so my father is this, you know, he's this prep school. He grew up in Manhattan and went to all these private schools, and his father, my grandfather, is a wealthy Italian immigrant, and so that was the whole plan for him, is that you're going to marry someone from a nice Italian family, good family, and some debutante. And then so when my mother came, so then when he brought my mother from Okinawa and introduced him as his wife, it was my grandfather was very upset and didn't approve. And I kind of thought that too. It was like I thought that, and again, I'm very embarrassed about thinking this. For a long time I thought my mother wasn't good enough for him. And because my father is just so knowledgeable and he's so smart, and he, you know, I mean, because he's a native speaker of Japanese, sorry, native speaker of English. That's all it was. And I didn't come to understand that for a long time, and like how all of his privilege allowed him to be a certain way. And but I think he could not, after what he'd been through in the war, after everything that he saw, there was no way that he could marry someone who didn't understand that darkness and that pain. And I think my mother understood it because of what she went through. She suffered a lot too, and I think I think that's part of it. They both were very serious, and they both were very kind and generous, and they both were really committed, and they forgave each other because it's an odd marriage. I'll say that. It doesn't seem like, sometimes I'm baffled by how it could work, but because they're mostly platonic, and this does seem to be more of like a friendship and companionship than what would be a romantic relationship. And maybe that's part of it. Maybe that's how they lasted so long, right? Because they understand each other in this way. But I think a lot of it is that knowing what they both have been through and being very accepting and kind about it. They both have meltdowns, you know, like it, and they are allowed to be in pain in front of each other. And I think that is really, really important, because I think a lot of families, and that's what they showed me. A lot of families try to hide their pain from each other, and you know, keep it to themselves, and not burden each other with it, or maybe they feel shame for it. But that's something that they've never done with each other, with me, and that, you know, and whenever I you know, whenever I have a meltdown in front of them, it's just kindness, acceptance, you're okay. So, and I think that's how maybe that's how long that's part of why they lasted so long.
Well, thank you very much, Elizabeth. I'm certain that what you've told us today about the book will inspire many people in the audience to go out and read it. I certainly hope so. And we look forward to the Japanese translation. So now I'd like to bring back Professor Ashizawa and to moderate our questions from the listeners.
Thank you for this really exciting back and forth conversation between two of you. I think here we have already several questions in the Q&A box, but because as a moderator, I wanted to a little bit take advantage of your the last kind of question, Professor Robson Reyes, about this kind of international marriage things, because as I teach women in Asia issues, there's one characteristic about Asian women's across different countries kind of share is that international marriage. It happened within Asia, but also it happened across the Pacific Ocean and then also continents. And then I read your book, and then I think even there's a tense tensions and some little bit difficult time between your mother and your father. It appears to be really happy, kind of lovely ending. Okay, it's not ended yet, but it's kind of lovely story. Do you think, you see your observation, because you also been to Okinawa, your parents' story is in a way in the reasonably common story of the Okinawan women coming to the States, like having international marriage, or maybe not necessarily. And then also, if you have any kind of your own view about this international marriage of Asian women, particularly women, women have to leave their country. So if you have some kind of your own view about that, I would like to hear from you.
Oh yeah, thank you. I think that's excuse me. I think that's very, very important to bring up. Yeah, because there's this very lopsided power dynamic that I observed in my parents' marriage. Right? It's the U.S. and Asia, but Okinawa in particular, on like a microscopic, like the scale. Because how my father grew up with so much privilege, and my mother, grew up essentially on a colony, and it was always the expectation, right? Always the expectation that she would leave her country, she would leave her culture and her family and live with him, right? That was never in question when they were married. And one of things I think is very, very unfair is that she had to learn English. She had to learn English, but he didn't have to learn Japanese. And of course that puts a huge disadvantage to my mother, because she's speaking in her second language all the time. So anything that she had to express had to be through her second language, and then my father always his first language. And I think that happens a lot with maybe that was actually one of the criticism of the book, is that I'm sure there are so many international marriages that are much more harmonious and functional, but that was what I observed for with my parents' marriage, is this unfairness, that the woman, especially if she was a woman, that Okinawan, my mother had to assimilate, right, and the burden was on her, rather than being equal. My father also assimilating to her culture, which he does. It's there. I wish I could explain some of the ways that, and it became more and more obvious to me when I was looking for them and accepting them, because as a child, I wanted my home to be American, right? And it was very important to me that my home was American, and I think they both reacted to me, like responded that way. But now that I am trying to accept both sides of me, so are they, and it seems like as it's evolved, the house, the culture is much more of a blend, right? So And I wish I could think of examples besides just my mother's amazing food. But that's and which also took a long time to appreciate her art, her craft with that. Mhm.
Thank you, thank you. You are giving us a little bit of key words for us even to digest further in our class. The lopsided power dynamics. Your writing, your book might have indeed, yeah, a little bit shaped, bring maybe new dynamics between your parents and then, yeah, as a child. Okay, so I think we have lots of questions. So I think, yeah, I'm not kind of getting more audience to ask their own question. And if also some audience, if you have question to Steve, also please feel free to write it down in the Q&A. Okay, so let me start with Professor Academics, Christine Dennehy. She said, so she teaches at the California State University, and then she's curious that Brina, Miss Brina, you mentioned that you also a little bit only know about Battle of Okinawa. So Professor Dennehy is teaching at undergraduate program on Asia. So if you have any suggestion to include a little bit more some new issues about Okinawa in her teaching on an Asian course and Japan course, if you have any recommendation, I also would like to hear that.
Oh my goodness, I feel like both of you, Steve and Kuniko, would know more than I would. So please feel free to chime in with any of your recommendations. There was what really personalized it for me were the memoirs. I'm not a scholar. I'm not a historian, but I read Girl with the White Flag, which is about a memoir of a survivor of the Battle of Okinawa, and also Princess Lily of the Ryukyus, another memoir. And I read, let's see, Okinawa GI Brides, and that was a student of yours, Steve, right? Chrissy. Oh, sorry, you're muted.
How's
there
that?
You go. There you go.
She is a journalist who, for many years, worked for the Okinawa Times. She wrote the book in Japanese, and then we translated it and published it here. The title is Okinawa's GI Brides: Their Lives in America, and it addresses exactly what we were discussing before about how these women came to the United States and what their experiences were. It's published by by the University of Hawaii Press, if I may do some book promotion.
Please.
I think if you're interested in that particular issue, that's probably the best book you can read. The author's name is Etsuko Takushi Chrissy. She married an American. I think actually he was teaching at the University of Maryland branch in Okinawa, but that book is very informative. Highly recommend it.
Yes, and it really informed me. So thank you. Thank you so much for.
Steve, would you like to add a little bit more issues, topics that maybe we should include in your teaching curriculum for undergraduate program?
I would rather hear questions from other people in the audience.
Okay,
I think
so
we should
maybe you
move
can
on
write
to
it
that.
down in chat box. Yeah,
you can consult bibliographies. I think we need to hear questions from other people.
Yeah, so let me move on to Colleen, my student, one of my students. So Colleen kind of shares with Elizabeth as a kind of being Asian American in the state. I mean, growing up in the United States, right? So she feels like biracial, and then also deal with this kind of idea of missing or lost heritage. So her question is, how did you begin the process of reconciling the rejected or missing identity with kind of inherited trauma, then begin to piece together kind of in a bigger narrative of imperialism. And also she wants to know that the process, consciously impacts the way you as a mixed Asian American women move through American society. It's a big question. But
Thank you. Wow, how did I begin the process? Well, and I talk a lot about this in the book. It was right after my mother had joined this church, and it was the Rochester Japanese Christian congregation, and it was it was a Lutheran church, but the pastor was I don't know, reverend, and he was Korean, and his wife was Japanese, and they started this church. They did a service in Korean and a service in Japanese. And my mother met some people at the restaurant and where she worked and decided to join. I didn't know anything about this church. All I knew is that, people are Japanese. And then when I went there, to see my mother's baptism, all of the women were, all the women were around my mother's age, and almost all of them, first of all, this church is almost all women. And almost all of these women were married to American men that had served in the military. And that was a huge epiphany for me. And again, I'm 34 years old, and I had never really thought about if there's anybody else like me. I had not come across that many people, maybe like one or two, but so I just thought that this was an isolated incident. This is and I'm not appreciating that this came from like a historic phenomenon, that this is something that there's too much of a coincidence going on, right? For all these women to be here, and for all of them to be married to men who serve in the military, and yeah, a lot of them were from Okinawa. So that's how I started. Just the question, right? Like, what happened? What happened in the world to bring these two people together? So that's how it started. And I'm sorry, there's more to the question. I was trying to read it, but what was the next part?
So I think she would stay even after this formal event. So you can a little bit think about this question further for our little bit more informal conversation.
Gotcha. Okay.
It's a big question, and also kind of question hitting to your personal experience. I think I want to move on to the new question. It's kind of more concrete question by David Fitzgerald. What did your father tell you about Japan or Japanese culture, including Okinawan customs, etc.? So did he really kind of give you a detailed his observation on that? And then was he a bridge for you between US and Japan or Okinawan? That's interesting question.
My father, right? What did my father tell me? That is an interesting question, because my father, because I told you about how he was obsessed with King Arthur, right? And the code of chivalry. So he was also growing up very into samurai, right? Like and that's mostly that's mostly what I knew about. But he also is a history enthusiast, and he'd always admired. He knows so much about just history in general. He knew a lot about Japanese history, but when he was growing up, history was told by battles, battles and kings and who took over this and who took over this. So that's how he always explained it to me, and a lot of it just kind of so and something that is quite a shame. And I don't, I'm not trying to make my dad this bad guy. He did the best that he could, but it was never explained to me that Okinawa is distinct from Japan. And not even from my mother, really. She just always, because that's how when people ask where she's from, I'm Japanese, because no one had ever known anything about Okinawa, where we were living. So that's something that I had to learn on my own. And then once I did know that, began to appreciate much more how diverse Japan is, right? And how diverse, just diversity in general. We tend to lump because it's very complicated and it's very nuanced, and it does take a lot of work to understand all these differences. That this is true of any nation or culture, right? There are all the variations within it. So my father had a very kind of blanketed, simplified view that he taught me, and that I accepted for a very long time.
I'm glad you did, kind of you went farther by yourself. And then also many Japanese who are living in mainland also, would pay enough attention to the difference between Okinawan and the mainland Japanese. So I believe that your book, translated one in Japanese, would probably help to educate some of the mainland Japanese.
That would be wonderful. I hope so too.
Okay, so it's a little bit more about lighting. Okay, so Yanan-san, I think I'm kind of two questions, but kind of related. So, okay, it's like a more straightforward question. What was the most challenging thing about lighting the book, right? And then what is one of the kind of things that really surprised you during the lighting of this particular book, Speak in Okinawa?
Mm-hmm. The most difficult part of writing it was, again, how I'm presenting my parents, because they're real people and they are so complicated. They're human beings. They're more than what's between these pages. Because my father gets portrayed in a certain way, my mother gets portrayed in a certain way, but they are so they contain multitudes, right? And so having to choose which versions of them, right, which aspects of them, for the sake of the narrative, was so hard, because what you leave out is very, very important. It can change your perception of a person. And so that was very, very hard. I was very, very nervous for my parents to read it. But they, and I guess that was the surprising part, is that they accepted it. They were, I can't believe they were fine with it. And because I think they know that this is one version of the truth. This is my truth. This is what I needed, what I needed to say and make sense of, even though I took a lot of their secrets, a lot of their very, very personal secrets, and I told them, and I don't know, maybe part of it is that people like to be explained, you know, even if it's not their explanation, at least maybe there's something about that, just someone trying to explain you. And so yeah, that was the most difficult thing. And I think the surprising part had a lot to do with that your the power of explanation.
So your parents really accepted your book, and they didn't even ask you to change any words or sentences. They have a big heart.
They do. They do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, yeah. Also, you were courageous too, indeed. Yeah. Right.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. I think as again in line with your writing question, just Jasper. I think you definitely he read your book, and then a really specific question about your chapter 7. Okay? So you describe the preparation and the anticipation of the imminent invasion, which was accompanied by the vivid this depiction of a group of villagers singing as they lay the foundation for underground children. In that moment, the reader is reminded that we sing in a language that's forbidden, a language that the Japanese don't understand. Okay, so what is the experience of speaking a forbidden language? Colonized, particularly, those, for the colonized people. Yeah.
Well, I mean, thank you very much for the question and remembering that part. That was very vivid to me too, and that was actually, it's hard. That is another one of the criticisms, is that because that obviously that wasn't my memory. That was someone else's memory that I read about, watching the people. It was my words, but not my memory. And that was also another hard part of writing, of like, am I allowed to do this? But I needed to tell myself this story. But in terms of the forbidden language, I don't have experience with that myself, because I'm privileged, and I grew up speaking English. But my mother is very, very self-conscious of her, not only her English, but also her Japanese. And it's because she was speaking a dialect. And that was, I can't say, I don't know if it was, for a long time, it was looked down upon, right? And for a long time it was forbidden in Okinawa, when they were trying to promote nationalism. But she's very, very self-conscious about her Japanese. She says she doesn't speak real Japanese. That's how she says it. She's like, I don't speak real Japanese. And so that idea that there's a Japanese that's real, and that what she's speaking is inferior or fake. And so she did internalize that the degradation. And I know one vivid memory is that she, well, it got better the farther away she got from Tokyo. But when we were visiting Japan, she would not, and this is 40 years after she moved, and we returned as a family. We did this tour of Japan that actually my father took us on, because he's, like, Japan, he loves it. And when we got to Okinawa, of course, it was my mother, but she wouldn't order. She speaks Japanese, right? And we go to this restaurant, and my father and I are fumbling around trying to order things in the menu in Japanese, and my mother asked my father to order And I was like, why are you doing that? Yeah, why are you doing that? And she wouldn't say. My father answered for her. It was like, oh, she's just a country gal in the big city, is what he said. Um, and so now, but now that I understand more about this, like that she's just so embarrassed of her accent and her not real Japanese. But I didn't understand that at that moment. It was later when I understood the difference between Okinawa and Japan, and the languages, the dialects.
Yeah, yeah. I think those kind of interesting episodes are indeed quite educational again for the Japanese and also Okinawan relationship too, when it comes to language, and also the differences between those two group of people in the same country. I think I'm going to go a little bit move on to coming back to your question regarding your background as a being Asian, Asian American in the States. So, so the two kind of related questions. So, what is actually, or what advice would you give to young women of color navigating their own heritage in the world, and maybe in the United States, right? And also kind of related, a question by Salman. You talked about how you felt at the times you are white because you grew up in the mostly white neighborhood, right? Neighborhood. When you decide to write this book and find more about your culture, did you find it difficult to do so because you felt you couldn't relate, since you felt as if you were white? Yeah.
Yeah, I did feel a lot of the times like an imposter, I still feel like I was and this is something that I, will struggle with for a long time. I feel like I wrote this book for, a white audience, and I was trying to really, what I was trying to do is write for my white side, right? Trying to educate my white side, right? But it was still from the perspective of that, and I know that there's so much that I missed out on, not embracing both of my heritages. There's a lot I missed out on, and there's a lot that I won't be able to catch up on. And but I think knowing what I'm missing, right? The fact that I don't speak Japanese, and that I have only been to Okinawa now. It was once when I was a baby. I've only been to Okinawa 4 times. So, but knowing what I'm missing is better than not knowing what I'm missing. And I think that's really, really important, is that it can seem, I guess that's what I would give it advice. Part of my advice is that it seems very daunting, right? Especially if you're severed from your heritage, from your home, from your history, as many people of color, many women of color are, especially, and also children of immigrants. I think it seems very daunting. For a long time, it says like, it's too much. I can't, right, this idea, I'll never catch up. So what's the point? There is a point. It's like the more you know, the better. The more about yourself, more about your history that you know, the better. And even if it's just a little bit, and you have to be in a place of ignorance, and which is very painful for a long time. That is my advice. My suggestion is to do it.
I think it's kind of related to what you said about this kind of dauntingness. Another question from my student, Lauren. she also kind of kind of resonate with your story as being okay. I'm just missing her question. Okay, as being, let me see. Okay, here we go. The biracial child growing up in the majority white area. So, what? Yeah, I don't know. Let me see. What should be done, right? To, let me see. I don't know whether the school or society or the people from the white side should do to lift or even make room for like a story experiences similar to you, and then my student and is there any advice for some group of the societies or maybe authorities that should be done something better?
I did not read a book by an Asian American author until I was in graduate school. So, I mean, that is terrible. There's no reason for that. So that was my experience. So growing up in school curriculum, it was all white people. In college, it was almost all white people, white authors. So just the diversity, getting so many more perspectives would have been just to be able to read about myself, someone like myself, or some, and just another experience would have been extremely, extremely helpful. I think also, I think there should be more of a push for learning more languages. I don't know why, whatever language it is. I think that's it helps you understand that there are multiple perspectives in the world. There's so many different ways of thinking and being, and I feel so trapped in my English sometimes. Like I can't. It's very sad to me that is the only language that I speak, and I think it's really, really important. I think that also helps for people to understand that there's more than one perspective. There's more than one being in the world. Way of being in the world.
Your book also should see your book would help, because the people would have more exposure to those interesting books written by Asian American, particularly women. I think related to your the last part, one a question from Naviha Bedouin. She said after writing your book, right? Did you want to now do you want to learn Japanese?
Oh yes, yes. I tried for a long time for about 3 years. That's what's so demoralizing. It's like I listened to a Pimsleur lesson almost every day for about 3 years, and while I was writing this book, I would do that, maybe even longer. And then I was trying to get ready for this trip, the second trip to Japan, which were 4 years apart. I went when I was 33, and then I went again when I was 37. And I when I was in Japan, Okinawa, I think I did okay. I mean, I didn't do great, but at least I tried, right? And I think that's huge. With my family, I was able to speak just a little bit of Japanese with my family, and I think that the effort meant a lot to them. And even so that it wasn't just their burden, right? They had to speak to me in English. I was trying to speak to them in Japanese. And then after that, everything got crazy. I'm publishing a book, life, pandemic. I completely stopped learning and taking lessons. So I have to get back into it. I have to. Thank you for reminding me.
One text from the audience. Okay, Frank de la Pena said, so have you learned any expression or words in uchinanchu? That's Okinawan style. Do you remember anything with that? Yeah,
Oh,
uchinanchu.
I don't. I'm so sorry. I remember. Yes, I remember being there and being like, I have to remember this phrase, and I didn't. I apologize.
I think haisai is.
Haisai. Oh, I did. Yeah, I do know that one. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it.
I do remember this one haisai. It must be hello or haisai.
And then there's I forget what it's for thank you. I also learned thank you, but I can't now I can't remember it. So
Do you know thank you in uchinanchu? Yeah.
okay, yep, that's it.
Okay, Steve, I think you're muted.
One of the words that I remember from Uchinanshu is waji waji, which means to be angry at something. Waji waji.
Okay, but that sounds like angry, yeah, rather than very angry. So that may something about Okinawans culture. Coming to culture, and then also you already kind of mentioned the kind of importance of the maybe education, how children would explore, and then I think you in the end, I think your parents had a quite great attitude for your education, right? In the end. So the one question from Zushuan Chen, you have pronounced correctly. Do your parents, right? So I guess obviously, but your mother, Okinawan mother, and then American father have a kind of cultural differences in your basically, education, kind of educational ideas in their children's educational ideas. Does your mom really have a specific idea, for instance, your own education?
Yeah. I mean, my mother knew it was important. She had she couldn't go to school after she had to quit school after 8th grade because in that time you had to pay for school. You had to pay for high school if you wanted to continue into high school. So it was and also very much contributed to her sense of inferiority very, very unfairly. But and my father has 2 master's degrees. So that's the difference. And again, adding to that power dynamic. My father's a very highly educated man, and it was so important to him, and also my mother too, because she knew that this is what needs to be done to get, but she couldn't help me, and I think that really made her feel bad about herself, and made me feel bad too, that it was always my father that I had to ask anything about homework, anything about anything, and I think that was a big regret of her, of all her life, is that she couldn't go to school. But she is, well, not only is she bilingual, I wish that I had her practical knowledge, right? And I think that this is coming from not even more so like her class, but maybe the culture and like kind of the indigenous nature of Okinawan culture, and how very close she, like I said before, she's an amazing cook, and also very, like, she's an incredible gardener, and yeah, she has this sense of being like this practical resort, like common sense knowledge that I think is just as important, right? And something that I never appreciated that growing up, and that I never wanted to discuss with her, because I always thought, oh, we're supposed to be talking about politics and history and philosophy, and that's how you show that you're smart, is if you can talk about those things. And she got left out a lot of the conversation. But now, I always ask her, like, how do you cook this? and what goes in here, and ask her about her garden, and like, what do you do with this plant, and how do you make this plant, and, like, so it's very much a different type of education, which are equally important, but one is way more valued than the other.
Yeah. I think I'm gonna have like two more questions just put it together, because your book is so multi-dimensional. So there's a kind of question from different perspective. Just to finish this formal part. One of the two last question is very interesting. So from Yeji Chun, when you decide to reconcile with the Japanese side of your identity, were you scared of being less American relative to your peers? Okay, so that's kind of, again, a little bit more personal, discovering yourself question. And then one more question is like a little bit more like Okinawa, US. So the US-Japan security still continues, so that we can expect more maybe international marriage kind of occurring between Okinawa or Japanese women and the United States, right? So this is a question by Akiko Kakaji. Would you have any thoughts on this new, maybe more kind of new military marriage couples coming along? Any advice on the future couple who would consider such international marriage, particularly in between, say, Okinawa, US bases, and then US servicemen? Yeah, that's the two last questions.
Thank you, Kiko. That I recognize your name. I know we've corresponded before. Thank you for coming. I think what I'd mentioned before about the learning each other's languages, I think is very, very important. As I don't think, especially for the children, so that you have a relationship with both parents that are equal, or as equal as can be. And I think it's just a gesture, it's a sign of respect, right? That you are in this together, and that you are both equally contributing to the culture of the marriage, right? If it's an international marriage. So I think that would be, but also it's, I don't know. I think people have to, there's obviously no, rule book or guidance. And so, because marriages are just difficult in and of themselves. So you add that the culture aspect, the coming from different cultures, but it goes with people too. It's just trying to understand each other as much as possible, being interested in your different backgrounds, being interested and enthusiastic about it, and trying to incorporate both of them as much as possible. If that would be ideal.
Okay, and one more, the first question. So were you afraid of being less Americans when you are kind of reconciling with your Japanese side of your identity?
Oh, I think that's a good question, because I think actually what helped spawn this journey was being very much ashamed of being American. I'm of course I'm American, so that it's complicated, and I'm in many ways I'm proud of it, but I think part of it was it happened earlier on, before I started investigating my my heritage, my culture. America is many things, right? And I had grown up learning about how the romanticized, glorified version of America. And then once I had learned that many mistakes were made, many evils were committed by I'm going to say by Americans, but in the name of America, right? So it actually wasn't, at that point, it wasn't difficult. I wasn't afraid. I was actually trying to be less American, you know. I trying to give myself a little bit of an out of this, you know, and I know that because I'm half, right, because that I'm multicultural, bicultural, that I'm also responsible, right? I know I can't just because I'm half Okinawan, it doesn't mean that I can't be that I'm not responsible for the other part of it. But that was that. I was not afraid of being less American, that's for sure. Yeah.
And then being yourself. So yeah, you really discovered being yourself. Okay, but that was a kind of quite interesting question and very interesting answer. Yeah, we kind of need to dig in to get that answer. Thank you for taking lots of questions. I think here it's like almost like a 5 past of our original time to end the event, but it was great having you, and then to basically give us lots of like a really kind of answer to our question, and then also your conversation between you and then Steve was very educational for our audience to listen. Steve, would you like to the final comments on Brina's book, Elizabeth's book, or your conversation with her?
I would just urge everyone to who's been listening today to buy the book, to read the whole thing. It's extremely well written. It will you won't be able to put it down if I can give it the ultimate praise. And as far as other suggestions for books about Okinawa, once you've read that book, or even if you don't, you just should decide what it is about Okinawa that you're interested in. Are you interested in the battle, history of the battle? Are you interested in the history of the post-war period, the American occupation and what's come after that? Are you interested in the initial Western contact with Okinawa, which was when Admiral Perry came with his gunboats? Everyone knows that he came and quote unquote opened Japan. Actually, he threatened the Japanese if they didn't open their to trade. But before he went to Japan, he stopped in what was then the Ryukyu Kingdom, which later became Okinawa. So if you're interested in that, just decide what you're interested. Look in the bibliographies. Of course, you can contact me for advice if you'd like. Also, we have a number of articles about Okinawa in the journal called the Asia Pacific Journal. It's an online journal. It's Asia Pacific Journal.org, I think is the website. It's free. You can read the articles about Okinawa. You just input Okinawa into the space, and we have lots of articles about Perry, about the battle, about the history of the post-war period. And Elizabeth has also printed some excerpts and a very interesting introduction as one of the articles to her book. So really, that's about all I had to say. So thank you very much for doing this. We really appreciate it. And that's it.
Thank you so much. Okay, so I would like to formally end the formal part of this the event. I would like to everyone to kind of join. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And then we wish luck for particularly the Japanese translation. When I get Japan, I will get 1 copy or maybe a few copies for my friends of your translated.